Here he is, Jeff Paterson, one half of the rink-wide duo with Andrew Wadden, our Canucks reporter. How we doing, Jeff?
Yeah, still trying to digest everything that's happened on what's turned out to be a fairly busy day, and I guess all the dust probably hasn't completely settled just yet. But as we look at the Vancouver Canucks, I think I wish there had been some July 1st like this in recent years, where they showed a little bit of prudency and some responsibility and didn't go long term with some of the free agents. So, I think all things considered for the Canucks, I think they made some decent moves, some smart bets for their hockey club. I think they're better. The question is, how much better? And ultimately, are they good enough?
Yeah, and we'll ask you that here in a second. We'll also set aside Ian Cole and Teddy Bluger for the moment, seeing as you seem to be okay with one-year deals. Let's go to the one guy who got term and got money, Carson Soucy. What did you make of that signing?
Well, they've been linked to him for a while, so I have done a little bit of homework here, and I'm familiar with the player. Obviously, watched him in Minnesota and then in Seattle. The danger always, though, and I do have this fear, and we saw it with Tucker Poolman, and before him, Tyler Myers. The Canucks get locked onto guys in other markets, and they think, oh, well, a guy plays a role there and plays it reasonably well. He can take on more responsibility, can handle more. And I just wonder if Carson Soucy is a perfectly slotted third pair defenseman in the National Hockey League. That's what he was in Minnesota. That's what he was in Seattle. And I think the Canucks see him as a left side guy on that second pair, sort of taking the OEL spot. And so, I want to give him an opportunity. I'm not here to write the verdict on Carson Soucy, but that's my fear, at the very least, is that he probably is what he is at 28 years of age. He's huge. You can't teach size. He's 6'5". He killed penalties. He blocked shots. He can be physical. The Canucks need all of those types of things. So I think there's a role here. I worry a little bit that maybe they're going to expect him to bite off more than ultimately he can chew. And so now I say all of that. If he's paired with Philip Hronek, that's pretty good insulation. So maybe that is a decent second pairing for the Vancouver Canucks. But again, they didn't go 5 or 6 years, and they didn't go $5 or $6 million. So I have no issue really with the money or the term. And I do think that he, checks some boxes for this hockey club, especially after what we watched the Vegas Golden Knights do en route to a Stanley Cup. This big redwood forest of a defense crew, and Rick Tocchet, he admired from afar. And so I'm not the least bit surprised that the Canucks sort of waded into the free agent waters and tried to add some size on the back end.
One more follow-up here before I turn you over to Blake. What about the 3-year full no-move clause on the deal, Jeff? I got to say, that one struck me as a little odd. You got to be able to move the player at some point.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not a big fan of just how liberal all of this trade protection is in hockey, unfortunately, but it comes with the territory, I guess, on a day like today, and you hope that doesn't lock them into something or handcuff them in any way. Again, he's 28, so you'd like to think that these could be his prime years. If there was protection and it was a 5-year deal, again, that would be a little more concerning for me. So I can live with it. I don't love it. But if this was their big splash, this wasn't a massive cannonball in the free agent waters. This was, dipping in and trying to find a guy, again, clear the front of the net. Look, you've got Quinn Hughes, you've got Philip Hronek. They're going to be your power play guys. You're not looking for somebody that's going to step up. And although I say that, Carson Soucy had 10 goals in that first season on expansion Seattle. So, for a team that got 7 goals from Quinn Hughes and 3 was the next highest total from a defenseman, if he has a shot and can put a couple pucks in, again, that's not what he's signed for, but if that's value add in this player on this roster, then hey, I'm down with that as well.
Let me just correct. Full no trade for the first 2 years, a 12-team no trade list in year 3.
Yes, there we go. What do you think all that means for Tyler Myers? Because now you think, okay, is that a replacement for Myers? Because he can play on the right side. Is the addition of size a replacement for Myers' size? Do they want both of those guys in there to create that redwood forest that you talked about? Do you see any prism to look at today's actions through the Tyler Myers angle?
Not really. I still think the Canucks will try to move off Tyler Myers when the opportunity presents itself, whether it's early in the season, after the bonus, or at the trade deadline. So replacement size for size, I suppose. But I don't know that they're going to, try to create the biggest tandem in the National Hockey League. I think, in my mind, and again, this will all be Rick Tocchet and it'll shake out at training camp, but I think Ian Cole could very well be a partner for Quinn Hughes. I think you get Soucy and Hronek, and you're looking at Tyler Myers to start the season as a third pair guy. And, how long is he here? That'll be determined, I guess, in time. So, but without a doubt, as long as Tyler Myers is here, he's a big body. We know that, and they'll try to get out of him what they can. But I just think that they knew that, he can't be a top 4 guy at this stage of his career. The way this team is trying to make progress, he's been part of the penalty killing issues here the last couple of years. And so I think that all of these signings today are sort of with an eye towards an upgrade on what they already had. And I include Philip Hronek only because we only saw him for the 4 games, but certainly, he's going to be the linchpin on that right side.
The penalty kill undoubtedly got a big boost today.
Blake, can I just jump in on Myers? With not qualifying Bear and him now perfectly slotted, is there a world where they keep Tyler Myers?
Well, to the deadline, I think there is. I think if they could move him at the deadline, now that if they're in the mix, I guess we've gone down this road many times in Vancouver about what if this team's in the mix with players that they're tied to. That said, I still think if you could move Tyler Myers at the deadline, you'd look at doing it. But to the penalty kill guys, without a doubt, I mean, everything that they did today was done with that penalty killing prism. But keep in mind, they spent $6 million to upgrade their penalty killing a year ago in this space with Ilya Mikheyev and Curtis Lazar, and that didn't work at all. So you can throw money after penalty kill, but the proof will ultimately be in the pudding, and so much of the improvement, I think, on the penalty kill is going to have to come from within, and that's going to mean Thatcher Demko, as the backbone from day one, hit the ground running. Again, adding Philip Hronek, I think he'll be a big part of that. But certainly Carson Soucy and Ian Cole. Ian Cole, he and Eric Hronek were the top penalty killing duo in Tampa, and that's a team that had Victor Hedman, had Michael Sergachev as well, and yet when they had their opportunities, Ian Cole at the age of 34 was still one of the guys that was first out over the boards to do that. So penalty killing, without a question, was one of the priorities for the Vancouver Canucks. It had to be dead last. And it was 31st the year before. So this wasn't, last year wasn't the anomaly. This has been a 2-year run where they have just been dismal. And so I think they're looking at, just a different composition of guys that are perhaps willing to block a few more shots and maybe, fill shooting lanes and those types of things that guys just haven't been doing enough of. Obviously, we've seen them move to Elias Paterson and Quinn Hughes, and I think they'll continue on that. But beyond penalty killing, the other one is familiarity. I mean, Teddy Bluger, a Pittsburgh Penguin draft choice. Ian Cole, the 2 Stanley Cups with the Pittsburgh Penguins. Jim Rutherford running it back a little bit old school here with guys that he and that front office are familiar with. And, I'm okay with that. It is a people business. And ultimately, if it helps that you have the book on some of these guys that you've been around and have, had success with, that's fine. But ultimately, it's what do they do for you in a Vancouver Canuck uniform and what they've done in the past. It helps sort of flesh out your thought process, I guess. But, now that you're paying them on your payroll, they have to step up and help the Vancouver Canucks.
Do they have to get a third-line center still? Do you think they still go out somehow, and maybe that's a Myers trade in September and it creates the space, but do you think a third-line center at some point is still on the docket?
I think it has to be. Teddy Bluger, again, is considered a decent penalty killer. He's gotten a whole lot better at faceoffs in the last couple of years in the National Hockey League. But 28 points is his high watermark, and that was a couple of years ago. Offense doesn't roll off this guy. In my mind, on a competitive, contending team, and I know the Canucks are not a Stanley Cup contender, but even on a playoff contending team, I'm looking for 40 points in my world, sort of from that third-line center position, and I just don't think Teddy Bluger is that guy. They still have this glut of wingers. I mean, this crazy logjam of wingers that at some point I think they're going to have to unlock there. So, we know that the trade market for wingers has been soft. I'm not sure that anything really changes in that regard, but that's where their surplus is. So once they get through free agency, maybe they step back and double down on the trade market and see what's out there and available. But, Teddy Bluger can help them kill penalties. I'm just in my mind trying to figure out what does that third line look like. And, Connor Garland's still here. Could he be a third line guy? Does Nils Höglander get an opportunity? Is Vasily Podkolzin, does that sound like a modern, is anything there sound like a modern play driving third line in the National Hockey League that's going to be able to help the Vancouver Canucks?
Well, let's continue the discussion to the crease, where I think a theme is developing. Need a third-line center, maybe got a fourth-line center. Need top 4 defenseman, maybe got number 5 defenseman. Zach Sawchenko, 7 games with the San Jose Sharks in 21-22. Is this the backup goalie, or is this the signal, Jeff, that they're riding Artur Silovs as the number 2 man behind Thatcher Demko, and Sawchenko is the insurance tendy?
Yeah, not really sure what to make of the goaltending situation still. And you've got Spencer Martin, who's under contract at the NHL level, 1 year deal, 1 year left on his deal. So, is it an open competition? I still, in my sort of heart of hearts, think that Artur Silovs, despite his run at the Worlds, could benefit from being the everyday guy down in Abbotsford for the first half of the season at the very least. And if you remember Thatcher Demko, when he broke into the NHL, he played his way, forced the Canucks' hand to give him an NHL game. And then he went back down to Utica. He played the start of the next season and got to about Christmas time, and that's when it wasn't working out for Anders Nielsen, and Demko was continuing to develop. And at that point, they elevated Thatcher Demko. I could sort of see something like that with Artur Silovs. So, again, I expect Thatcher Demko is going to play a ton. When the schedule came out last week, they only have 1 back-to-back in their first 14 games, which scares me a little bit, because that invites just 13 starts in the first 14 for Thatcher Demko if they, want to get off to a good start. And, they do have to run the risk of, or make sure that they don't run the risk of burning him out and turning him into dust. But he is their guy, and they're going to play him a lot. So if Thatcher Demko is going to play a lot at the NHL level, do you want Silovs just sitting here as the backup right off the bat, or could Spencer Martin sort of hold down the forward, or, is there a plan C perhaps? So, lots of moving parts when it comes to the goaltending, I suppose, there. I don't think it's as clear cut today on July the 1st to say that Artur Silovs is going to be the backup, but I also think it's fair to say that Artur Silovs could come to camp and absolutely earn that opportunity.
Yeah, absolutely.
I do feel comfortable saying Zach Sawchenko will not be the backup. I do feel that comfortable.
No, but the question here is it insurance policy by committee with Martin, Sawchenko, and Silovs, or is one of them, as Jeff notes, going to emerge? And you have to think that Silovs is going to have every opportunity to show them that he's number 2. And as you long talked about, Blake, given the proximity of Abbotsford, you should have the best of both worlds here.
He could be number 2 on the depth chart, but number 3 in execution. Right?
That is very fair. Very
fair.
Different things. Because I'm not sure you have a lot of confidence in Spencer Martin after the season he just put up.
Yeah. But they also went and they signed the big Belarusian guy late in the season as well. So, I thought he was going to be the backup in Abbotsford, but, we'll see. I mean, you can never have too much goaltending in an organization, I suppose, but I also thought it was curious that they came through the draft and they didn't draft a goaltender this year, and I thought maybe part of that was because just right now where they are in the system, they felt that they had enough bodies at that position. So we'll see how it all goes. The other one that we haven't talked about here, guys, Matt Irwin, depth defenseman through and through, but he played 60 games for the Washington Capitals last year. This is a guy, it's funny, I've always thought he's a Victoria guy, played his junior hockey in Nanaimo, and I just always thought at some point it would make sense for Matt Irwin to find his way into the Vancouver Canucks organization. Well, as it turns out, the year that they're going to go back to Victoria for training camp, I don't know where he fits in all of this, but a big body, 6'2" guy who has 500 games of NHL experience. So, where he falls in the depth chart and all of that, too soon to know, but not surprised that Matt Irwin has, at long last, and he's bounced around the NHL, but he's made his way back to British Columbia.
On the goaltending front, I got zero problem. Flood the position with younger, low-cost candidates and see if anybody emerges. That is totally fair.
Yeah, you wonder how much of that is reaction to the Golden Knights guys. You never know who's going to give you 3 good months and go on a run, right?
The Golden Knights got wins from 5 different goaltenders, and Neil was the 5th to ride with them, and of course take them to a Stanley Cup. Okay, let me ask you the devil's advocate position, Jeff, that Mike Johnson was touting on the TSN panel, and more on Mike's work actually later in hashtags. You've spent $3 million apiece on a couple of defensemen. would you have been better off spending $6 million on one defenseman, or was that player simply not available here?
Yeah.
Well, I think you could make the argument, but you would still need that other defenseman. They needed 2 top 4 defensemen, right? Like, just the way things have shaken down here with the Bear injury and the OEL buyout, they needed bodies that can play in the National Hockey League. So, I don't think they were truly ever in on a guy like Dmitry Orlov. He seemed to want to handpick his landing spot and stay in the East and all those types of things. So, beyond that, I'm not sure where the focus would have been in this free agency year. But, yeah, I mean, this is the danger that, we can sit here and say, yeah, I think they've upgraded from last year, but they were brutal last year. So they had to get better. They better have gotten better. But it's a question of how much better and, is it going to be good enough? Because we know that there was a sizable gap between them and the playoff bar in the Western Conference. So I want to give Filip Hronek every opportunity. I kind of feel like he's the forgotten man in all of this just because the trade was made whenever it was March the 1st, and then he played the 4 games and disappeared. But, they are going to roll out a pretty shiny toy and a guy that they paid a pretty price to get. And I do think that he gives them, some nice depth, and you can split him and Quinn Hughes, and then it's a question of, how do these other guys fit into all of this? And just in my mind, Ian Cole is a guy that has played the right side, even though he's a lefty, but a veteran guy who's played, with so many partners over the year, has some versatility. Like, I could see him being the caddy to Quinn Hughes, and then that would leave Carson Soucy to play with Filip Hronek. So, I do think that the defense is better with the signings today, but also when you include Filip Hronek in the conversation, I do think that there's an upgrade here for the Vancouver Canucks, but we know they had so much distance to cover that that's still my concern is I just don't know how much better ultimately they are and if they're good enough to be in the playoff conversation here in the Western Conference.
Not really the same question at third line center, because when you look at Ryan O'Reilly, where the Canucks had interest, a 4-year deal at $4 million plus per, that's probably too rich and takes them out of getting a third piece or a significant piece. One of the defensemen is probably sacrificed if you're going Ryan O'Reilly. I saw a bunch of Canucks fans stumping for Morgan Geekie, the big Western League centerman who signed today for $2 million per to leave I believe he left the Seattle Kraken, if I'm not mistaken. Don't have the team that he signed with here right in front of me. So much going on.
Boston.
Something like, thank you, Grady. Something like that, Jeff. Do you think they picked the wrong third line center, given the cost?
No, I think the price that they paid, go back to familiarity, and maybe they feel that they know this player and can squeeze a little more out of him or put him in the right situations. But I come back to this idea that a career 28-point guy at the age of 28, it's unlikely that he's going to break out and become a 40, 45-point guy at this stage of his career. It does take some of the pressure off Nils Aman, who I think will now be able to sort of grow more into that fourth line role that I think he's better suited to. And, Nils Aman checked off a lot of boxes for the Canucks last year as a rookie and basically found money. But at the same time, the underlying numbers were not pretty for him in his first year in the National Hockey League. And I'm not expecting a ton of offense from him, but if he is going to develop into any sort of shutdown, reliable guy for Rick Tocchet, he is going to have to shore up his face-offs. He's going to have to shore up his defensive performance. And so that takes some of the pressure, and I guess Teddy Bluger can step in there. But, this is July 1st. They don't go to training camp till September 21st. They don't start playing till October 11th. Like, this is a marquee day on the hockey calendar, certainly, but things can continue to change. They better change. Your roster has to evolve. And so, as we said, like, the trade front hasn't yielded a whole lot for them of late, but that doesn't mean that it can't. So I would think that, this is insurance at the very least, that this is a guy that can step in and play and is an upgrade on Nils Aman, but I don't know that he is the answer ultimately for the roster that they want to put on the ice.
Hey, please don't OEL have a bounce-back season in Florida, fellas? What did you
Honestly,
make of that
if he
deal?
does, good on him. I'm sorry. He had multiple opportunities for a bounce-back season.
Great landing spot for him. They're going to be down some defensemen early on, so we're going to find out early. Montour and Ekblad both injured on the run to the Stanley Cup. We'll find out if a full summer off is going to allow him to train and be effective. The game's not getting any slower, and so I hope Florida knows what it's getting itself into. But just in terms of expectations and pressure and spotlight and the critique and all that kind of stuff, Florida's a great retirement home for a lot of people, and maybe it'll be a retirement home for OEL as well.
Jeff, he's in his early 30s. He's not going to Del Boca Vista anytime soon. Lastly, buddy,
that's effectively what the Florida Panthers organization is. They
used to be. That's what they used to be. Now it's Arizona. That crowd's retiring in Arizona.
The
NHL crowd retires in Arizona. You're quite right, Jeff. He can't go back. All right, the big picture poll question by Bodog. With the moves the Canucks have made, do you see a path to the playoffs?
Well, the path to the playoffs remains improvement from within, and sort of, best case scenario that Elias Paterson stays healthy and is a 100-point guy, and Quinn Hughes can back up a 75-point season with another one, and that there's no slippage from JT Miller, and that Kuzmenko has the kind of season that he had in his first go around. So you're addressing some areas of weakness in free agency, but ultimately the core of this group is the core of this group. And so much of the conversation starts with Thatcher Demko. If Demko can get back to where he was 2 years ago, where he was in the bubble, then absolutely. I mean, he himself is a path to the playoffs for the Vancouver Canucks. So, look, we've said it all, like, they've got lots of good pieces, but they haven't surrounded those good pieces with enough good pieces, and so they think that they have layered up a little bit here today, and we'll find out. I do think there's a path to the playoffs for them. But I'm not going to sit here and bang the desk and declare on July 1st that they will be a playoff team. But if all of their top-end guys have the kinds of seasons that you're hoping that they will, and you notice that sentence starts with an if, right? Capital I, capital F.
Yes.
I think both were capitalized.
Yeah, exactly.
Should be capitalized.
That's the danger in all of this. But, I guess I just kind of, my logical brain just looks at, they probably needed 6 or 7 more wins. If penalty kill was even league average, that's probably 3 wins right there. Like, the penalty kill sunk them on a lot of nights last year. Thatcher Demko healthy and performing, he can deliver a bunch more victories. I think there is a way that it can happen, but again, pretty fine lines. And if any of those top players takes any kind of step back, that's the danger and that's the risk, but that's why they play the games.
And agree wholeheartedly, Jeff. It remains an uphill climb, and we're here on July 1st, 2023, still talking about a path to the playoffs, not a contending Vancouver Canucks team after all this mystery over the last 9 years. Have a marvelous Canada Day weekend. Thank you for stepping up here today, and we'll catch up with you on Sekeres and Price this week.
All right, guys. Thanks.